So last spring, the Board of Trustees led 3 visioning circles that touched on where people want the energy of this church to go in the near term and where they imagine the congregation might be in 2030. And the conversations necessarily touched on why UUI exists and what its values and purposes are, and which possible expressions of those values among many are energizing and exciting to UUI members right now. There were 3 different conversations. There were varied participation, but they were remarkably consistent in the themes and the ideas and the values that were surfaced. And so one of the things the board did was create a word cloud out of all of the comments and ideas to sort of see what were the common themes and what stood out. We're going to share that in the e-blast. It wouldn't be very readable for me to put it up on the screen. But I'll tell you some of the words that appeared in that vision for UUI, in your vision for UUI. And the biggest word, the number 1 word, no surprise, was community. Community. And then around community were words like relevant, relating, creating, and hosting. Hosting. And in the other words, there was a lot of emphasis on creating local community. And a lot of what you were sharing was your desire to draw people into our campus and to make our campus more relevant to the local community, the neighborhood, Butler, Tarkington, around, more relevant, more useful, more helpful, more engaged. You envisioned a stronger relationship with Butler University. You envisioned hosting art events, speakers and discussion forums for the community, neighborhood talent shows, a cafe. You talked about opening up community garden spaces on the grounds, planting fruit trees for all to enjoy, putting in more picnic tables, modernizing the playgrounds, even building a pavilion or a stage where we could hold our own outdoor worship services or religious exploration classes, but also where the community could have cookouts, summer concerts, community theater. It's a vibrant and compelling vision, and it's very local, and it's very physical, very embodied, right? It's a vision embodied in the physical assets of this congregation, the buildings, the grounds, our cash savings, our proximity to Butler, and our connection to Butler-Tarkington. And the last time I preached, way back on July 10th, it's been a minute, we talked about the virtual component of this congregation's multi-platform future. And I talked to you about the beauty of online communities and our vision for creating something new and exciting and building community in virtual spaces. Community that is distributed across time and space, community that is extended and asynchronous, that happens at all different times, that spans geographies and communities. And what emerged in the visioning circles was like the other side of that coin. Community as a drawing in to a very specific time and location. Community that is local, that brings people together, that builds on proximity and shared experiences like food and gardening and singing side by side. So we have an incredibly beautiful campus. We own 4 buildings. We are in a historic neighborhood right next to a wonderful university. We have a compelling story about our values and who we are written out in glass and steel for all to see the minute you enter our parking lot. And I'm talking about our solar array that makes UUI an almost 100% solar-powered church. It's the first thing you see when you pull into the parking lot, just when you get past our beautiful prairie garden, which speaks to another set of values. The next thing you see is the trans-inclusive pride flag waving in the breeze. You can see it through that window. The next thing is the sign to the labyrinth, which is a destination feature. I don't know if you know this, but people drive to UUI from all around just to see and walk our labyrinth. And then as you approach our beautiful sanctuary, you pass our Black Lives Matter banner, another visible statement of our values, our memorial garden offering peace, rest, shade, nature. The sanctuary itself houses ever-changing artwork from local Indiana artists, and our distinctive leather chalice behind me was a sculpture created by internationally known Indiana artist Diana Thornhill Miller. And then beyond the sanctuary, all that open green space, perfect for running, playing, picnicking, walking dogs. Some of our neighbors regularly practice golf on our grounds. I don't know if you know that. Why would we not want to build on these things? Why would we not want to invite the community into this space? And why shouldn't this space draw in the community? So both visions for the future of this church, the local and the virtual, they're compelling visions. And they both have challenges. We talked about virtual church last time. Let's talk about the physical church. UUI has never been a neighborhood church, although that has always been part of its vision for 40 years. But the reality is that people come from all around, right? We're not a neighborhood church in that sense. People sometimes drive 30 minutes or even longer to get to UUI. We draw from a very big circle geographically. And so it's never been that easy to draw a group of people to this campus outside of Sunday morning. And that has gotten even more so the case after COVID, right? The congregation as a whole has gotten used to not being here at 615 West 43rd Street, for better or worse. The grounds, the Prairie Garden, the Memorial Garden, they are a lot of work to maintain. The buildings need improvements, especially to make them more accessible, which is a big concern. The Labyrinth, honestly, is overgrown right now and needs some TLC. And our relationship with the Butler-Tarkington neighborhood, our relationships, they're not terribly strong. There is a lot of good work that has been done in the past, and I want to honor that, and there are good relationships to build on. But we would need to build on those relationships, which means, again, showing up in the neighborhood consistently. And I don't offer these words as any kind of discouragement, but just to say, if this be our vision, it is going to take some real commitment and some real work on our part to make it happen. And that's not a bad thing at all, because our faith communities are supposed to invite us into real commitments, right? They're supposed to inspire in us generosity of time and treasure toward a shared vision. That's how church becomes a transformative experience. That is how we grow our spirits, by doing bold things together. When UUI first purchased this very campus back in the early 80s and committed to having the church here, the then members put in thousands of hours of volunteer work together over several summers to fix up the buildings and grounds and turn them into the usable space we enjoy today. Literally thousands of hours. It is a story of community effort that changed them, and it made the papers too. And what this brings us back to is something that I named in the first half of this sermon back on July 10th. We are facing a time of great opportunity as a congregation, and also a time of uncertainty and change. We're being asked to innovate and grow the church in multiple directions at the same time, in the online world and here on our campus. And both visions ask significant commitments of time and resources, and we don't have infinite time and infinite resources, which means to get to the future we are dreaming of, there will be big asks and there will be tough choices, there will be trade-offs and compromises, and there will be some gambles, not all of which will pay off. And because this community functions as a democracy, you will be intimately involved in all these things. You will be discussing and making a lot of these decisions, sometimes as committees, sometimes as teams, sometimes you are going to even vote on them in congregational meetings. Not every little decision, I hope. Please trust your board, empower your staff to work for you. But ultimately, the life of this church is the work of the whole congregation, right? It's your work. And this is how it is intended to be. And then you are all going to have to live together with the results and the changes. And so to do these things, you're going to have to be really good at doing community. And the good news is you are already good at doing community. But this year and in the years to come, my hope is that we can get even better in doing community together. So, with apologies now for a little bit of sermon whiplash, I want to pivot for the rest of this sermon to talk a little bit about how we do community as UU congregations. And since we've been talking all about the physical church today, I want to bring us back to that virtual world and suggest that the church as a whole has something to learn from those virtual communities that I was talking about last time. And so for the rest of the sermon, I want to talk about three things that I think churches could learn from online communities to be better churches. And again, the physical transformation of this church is going to require us to do community well. So here are three things I think churches could learn from online communities about how to do community well. And we'll share this again later in the week on Slack and in the e-blast, so you don't have to take notes. Okay, so first thing, successful online communities know why they exist. They have a clearly defined purpose, which they know and which they say right up front. And they maintain boundaries around that purpose. So, for example, a My Little Ponies fan fiction community online is for the sharing of My Little Ponies fan fiction. And that is it. If someone comes into that online community and they want to post like their Minecraft fan fiction, they will be gently reminded that this is not the place for that. And the post may even be removed. And there's nothing wrong with Minecraft fan fiction, God knows, but it doesn't belong here. The community knows what it's for, and it sticks to its purpose. Now, churches are a little different, because churches are very complex institutions, and they serve a wide variety of needs. Right? There's not one single thing that a church is for, and different people come for different reasons. And the reasons, even for a single individual, can and do change over time, right? And that's okay, that's good. But at its core, the church needs to know why it exists, what purpose or greater good it serves, what vision inspires and sustains it. The church needs to know its why, to borrow the language of Simone Sinek. And it ought to be able to articulate that why at least tolerably well. Maybe not with as much specificity as the My Little Ponies fan club, but at least with as much enthusiasm. So I offer these questions to you for reflection and conversation. What do you think? Well, first of all, what is your why for coming to UUI? And it could be many different things. And what do you think UUI's why is as a church? The church has a mission and vision statement, of course. It has a constancy of purpose. You can find that on the website, but without looking at it, it might be fun to write out your why and what you think UUI's why is, and then look at the actual words that are on the website. Clearly, I have a minister's idea of what fun is, but... And then we can ask, how do these two visions that make up our multi-platform future, the online church, the local embodied church, how do they serve that vision, that why, separately and together? Because we'll probably find that they serve it in similar ways, and they also serve it in unique and distinctive ways. Okay, so number two, second thing that churches can learn from successful online communities. Successful online communities have clear rules of engagement, and they enforce them. Online communities are usually very explicit about posting both the purpose of the group and the expected norms for participation. They are very clear about what is and is not acceptable behavior, for example. And oftentimes, before you even join a group, you have to indicate that you've read the community standards and you understand the rules and that you agree to abide by them. Now, in a UU context, a Unitarian Universalist context, we call these kinds of agreements covenants. But covenants function a little differently. First of all, covenants are not the same as a set of rules in the way an online community might have rules. Covenants are agreements about how we all want to be together in order to meet everyone's needs and accomplish the group's purpose. Covenants can be aspirational and positive, not just what we ask people not to do, like please don't interrupt or please don't give advice if it's not asked for, but also what we hope people will do, like engage with curiosity about other people, or be mindful of your body's needs during this activity and practice good self-care. And one of the things that we'll be doing more this year is practicing covenanting when we get together. Creating covenants when we get together can be one way of asking ourselves the question, what does it mean to be doing this thing that we're doing, whatever it is, whether it's a committee meeting, a book discussion, a dinner gathering, a get out the vote action? What does it mean to be doing this thing we're doing as Unitarian Universalists? And how are we doing it differently than we otherwise might because we're Unitarian Universalists? How do our faith values and our traditions and our aspirations call us to do this work differently? And another powerful question we'll be asking related to that is, now that we passed an eighth principle that commits us to being an inclusive and anti-racist congregation, how does that commitment show up in our covenants? How do our agreements about that reflect how we will be as a community? And how do we practice coming back together when we have wandered away from our agreements? Which brings us back to point number 3 that we can learn from successful online communities. Successful online communities usually have active and engaged moderators. Moderating exists to enforce the agreements and the boundaries of the community. If someone violates the community agreements, moderators will notice and respond. And this is to protect the health and well-being of the community. If you are abusive, if you troll, if you spam people with advertisements, if you keep pulling the community away from its stated purpose, usually you'll get a reminder, this is what we agreed to as a community. Then you might get a warning. Then you might get a suspension and then possibly even banned from the community. Now, in Unitarian Universalist churches, it's very different. Churches don't have the equivalent of moderators, and covenants are not rules. When covenants are broken, we don't respond like someone has broken a rule and that they need consequences or punishment. We gently call each other back to the agreement, and we look to see if the agreement needs to be changed or expanded. What churches do need to have, because they do not have moderators, is a special kind of culture. And this is a culture of noticing and naming. Noticing and naming. Covenants do get broken because we're all human, we're all imperfect beings. We say we won't interrupt, but then we do. We say we won't violate a confidence in this small group that we're in, and then we absent-mindedly tell a story at coffee hour that was not ours to tell. We make a comment, we make a statement, we tell a joke that we later realize was a microaggression, right? Racism, sexism, ableism, classism, homophobia, all these things show up in UU spaces, not because we don't have good hearts and good intentions, but because we're imperfect beings and we all have growing and learning to do. And then even within the covenants we make, there may be misunderstandings or disagreements about what those mean and how we follow them. So what healthy churches promote is a culture where people can notice when we have fallen outside of our agreement, name it, and then invite curiosity about how we come back into agreement. And this shouldn't and needn't involve shaming and criticism and defensiveness, right? It's about noticing and naming and being open and curious. So just as one example, at our question box sermon in May, the question was asked, why is this platform space not accessible? It's not. And the question was asked, is that consistent with our agreement about being welcoming and inclusive to all people? And the curiosity was, what could be different? And it was a question that was very well asked. I'm glad that it was noticed and named. And part of the answer is we've purchased ramps to make the space accessible. And when those get here, which hopefully is soon, we're going to have to figure out how to implement those ramps. And then this worship space that we all share is going to look different because of our shared values. And we're going to have to live with that difference. In a UU congregation, the moderator function is owned by the entire congregation, not by a handful of individuals. And curiosity is key, because a culture of shaming and criticizing is absolutely toxic to a church community, any community. But a culture of curiosity and open communication can foster spiritual growth and learning, which is one of the very reasons this congregation exists. So in the story of Musa and Naguib that we shared today, which offers one model for how we can be together as a community, when Naguib pushes Musa down, there's this moment of shock when a thing has happened. And there's a moment of anger that is tipped over into a moment of unskilled and hurtful action on the part of Naguib, who pushes Musa down. And in that moment of hurt and conflict, the story could have gone in any number of different directions. Musa could have pushed back or even struck back in his own anger, could have retaliated or escalated. Naguib could have minimized from shame and defensiveness what he did. You're fine. It was no big deal. I barely pushed you. Why are you making a big deal out of this? Right? Musa could have walked away then and there. Musa could also have pretended that what happened was no big deal, to minimize conflict, to not have to be in this moment of tension with his friend. Let's just pretend this didn't happen. And instead, Musa simply names what has happened. He writes in the sand, "Today my best friend pushed me." And then there it is, the break in the covenant of the friendship that has been named rather than minimized or amplified or avoided. It's just named for what it is. And it's a powerful moment for both of them. It's a moment of truth-telling. And Naguib, the story tells us, is ashamed, but he's not trapped in shame because the words have been written in sand, not carved in stone. The naming is not a condemnation, and because the words are written in sand, there is room for curiosity about possible futures and curiosity for the two boys to come back together. And we should note that this story would be a different story if Naguib pushed Musa down every time they went to the beach, or lashed out every time he was angry. Right? Healthy relationships, healthy friendships, healthy congregations have boundaries. And behavior that is consistently disruptive, consistently threatening or abusive, merits a response because people have a right to be safe in their church. Right? So at UUI, the board handles that kind of ultimate boundary setting through a disruptive behavior policy. But that's far outside the norm. That's not what we're normally talking about when we talk about those moments of tension where we name with curiosity and we talk about how do we come back to our agreements about how we want to be together. And in the end, one of the greatest strengths a congregation can have is the ability to lean into those moments of tension rather than sidestep around them, and to do so with curiosity and kindness. The poet Naomi Shihab Nye says that kindness comes out of a recognition of our shared vulnerability, our recognition that any one of us fellow travelers could be the one who has fallen by the side of the road. One of the greatest strengths of this congregation, one of your greatest strengths, I believe, is not the campus, beautiful as it is, or our rapidly expanding technological capabilities, impressive as they are. It is the way you listen to one another and encourage one another and support one another through good times and bad. Your strength is your shared joys of sorrows, your sharing of joys and sorrows, and the culture of mutual care that you have created here, which has grown all the stronger through these last very difficult few years. And when those moments of tension happen, because of course they will, when hard choices and difficult trade-offs have to be made, remember first, before speaking or acting or voting, remember who you have been together and how you have been together and what you have been through together. Remember your shared joys and sorrows. Remember those moments of shared kindness like they were carved into the rock. And then let us be brave in building the beloved community together, because the future is brilliant. It needs our values, and we are the ones that we have been waiting for. Amen.